Hello and welcome back, my beautiful people. Today we're going to be talking about trauma cycling. Before we get into that, let me just briefly talk about the 5 bodies that we have within our one body. This is important because when we're healing ourselves from all these traumas and trapped emotions, they can be stored in each one of our bodies. And only when we use our free will to call them out by name, they must leave. So general healing can be helpful, but when we dig down deep and find the core knots and wounds and remove them, we're able to heal so much more deeply. So we have a spiritual body, a mental body, an emotional body, a spiritual body, and an energetic body. And as I said, trauma can be stored in all 5 of those bodies. It can be stored in our DNA, and we've likely inherited some from our ancestors. I don't know if you've heard about the story that they've done on rats. Essentially, they electrocuted a generation of rats, and it took up to 5 or 6 generations later of their offspring being exposed to this electrifying machine without it being even used on them to be cleared of this trauma. And that's just wild. I'm sure you're aware that we're the creators of our reality. But without healing our trauma, we're not able to create our ideal reality because our internal reality is unhealed and in chronic stress. So let's get to the basics of what a trauma cycle is. Ideally, in our day-to-day life, we would be in what's called a window of tolerance. But due to various emotional stressors, we can be pushed into hyper or hypo, fight or flight state, which over time, if we experience that chronically, we can't return back to the window of tolerance. Now, if you have healthy ways of coping, it's easy for you to return from the hyper or hypo state to that window of tolerance. But if you've been chronically exposed to all these emotional traumas and triggers, you're often walking around your daily life in a hyper or hypo state. Okay, now trauma cycle. Picture a circle, and we'll say the starting point is here. This would be a memory of a traumatic event being triggered. And then we move here. The trigger then creates emotions, and you're pushed out of your window of tolerance. Now we're moving around, you enter a hyper or hypo state, and then this altered state creates behavioral and characteristic changes. And without recognizing this, the cycle will continue. So if we've experienced a lot of these emotional triggers throughout our lives, we often start craving these trauma cycles. We often then fall into the behavioral pattern of recreating these traumatic events over and over with different people and circumstances. The trauma cycle can lead us into a trauma bond, where the person who's experienced a lot of these traumas then forms a bond with their abuser. Now, following the behavior of this trauma cycle often leads to codependency. The codependent individual often finds their self-worth from fixing and saving others. It's ego and trauma-driven, and it's seeking everything they need externally instead of internally as intended. So this trauma cycle then turns into a trauma bond, where the codependent individual often creates an unhealthy relationship with an abuser in the form of narcissist. And this is called trauma bonding. Now here's the stages of trauma bonding: love bombing, trust and codependency, criticism, gaslighting, resigning control, loss of self, and addictions to highs and lows. I just want you to take a few moments. You can pause the video, come back later, and take the time to identify what trauma cycles or trauma bonding you've experienced. Maybe take notes of what unresolved childhood wounds and evidence you have of those. And to take it even further, to identify a trauma trigger, make a list of the things that you need to feel safe. Okay, I think that's good on this video. I think I'm going to need to do a series on this one. Let me know if this helped. I hope it touches the surface, and I'll see you next time.